Today we're going to talk about the origin of our chickens, our domestic chickens that we have in our backyards and everywhere in the world. We're going to talk about where they came from, what their origin was, what their history was to turn them into the birds that we have today. And we can use that information when we understand where our birds came from. We can use the information to help us set up their living situations so that we can really keep them happy and healthy and avoid problems before they even start. The origins of our domestic chicken are a little bit lost to time, but we do know some facts about where our chickens came from and how we started the process of domesticating them. So chickens come predominantly from a bird called a red jungle fowl that is found in Southeast Asia. And that bird is the foundation for our once upon a time human ancestors slowly developing chickens into what we know them as today. There are multiple other jungle fowl species that came in and out of the chicken domestication journey, but the main feature is the red jungle fowl. Archaeologists believe that chickens were domesticated somewhere between 8,000 and 3,500 years ago, so there is some disagreement onto the exact point at which they were domesticated, but they do agree that they were domesticated in Southeast Asia and that there were probably multiple points of domestication over time, which is why the genetics of our chickens that we have today are so diverse from different places in the world. It seems like one of the main reasons that chickens were domesticated way back in the day is for ceremonial purposes and for cockfighting. It seems like ancient people domesticating chickens really enjoyed how tenacious and fantastic the roosters were and still are at really giving them a fun sport to engage in. So for thousands of years, the main reason that humans kept chickens around was to help them in their religious ceremonies and to give them a fun activity to participate in with cockfighting. Over time, the value of chickens for their egg-laying abilities and for making a tasty meal became a more relevant reason why people like to keep chickens. But all throughout this period, chickens remained pretty similar in appearance to the red jungle fowl. They had different colors and different features, but generally they were a small, scrappy kind of bird that didn't have a heck of a lot of meat on its bones and were primarily kept for their egg-laying abilities when they were being kept as a bird for human food purposes. We know that ancient Egyptians seem to have had chickens as part of their culture as far back as 3,500 BC, and they actually had developed a system of artificially incubating chicken eggs. They had elaborate systems of clay brick ovens where workers would keep them at a consistent temperature and turn the eggs, and they were able to hatch chicks just like we do today in a modern electric incubator and produce chickens at quite some scale, which is pretty cool given that it was such a long time ago. There's a traditional tale saying that the Romans brought the Dorking chicken to Britain way back in 1 AD when they first wandered over there to see what they can do in the British Isles. We don't have facts to back up that story, but it is a picture of how chickens traveled across the world with different peoples as they moved from one place to the other. Chickens have been with humans for thousands of years, and while we don't know the precise dates of all of this, we do know they've been around a very long time. So how did people keep their chickens through all of these thousands of years? Well, remembering that chickens were predominantly a small, scrappy kind of bird, similar to the game bantams that we have today. Now, people are very creative, and I'm sure somewhere in the world they had developed different kinds of chickens, but in general, for most people, chickens were a fairly feral-ish type of creature that mostly roamed around the farmyard as a bonus livestock animal. Generally speaking, people didn't keep chickens exclusively on a dedicated chicken farm. The peasants and the smallholders and whatever the people were that were in the culture at the time just kept the chickens roaming around their farms, their small farms, their big farms, eating up the scraps and bugs from other livestock, because cows and goats and sheep were the more important livestock, and chickens were sort of a bonus animal. With chickens being a bonus animal, they really had to just fend for themselves in most instances. They had to lay eggs, because that was the main reason they were being kept, for a steady supply of eggs for the household and potentially for sale into markets, if markets existed in the culture that people were in. And they had to reproduce well, because they had to survive predation. Generally speaking, people weren't too concerned about keeping their chickens enclosed and safe at night. The chickens just slept in outbuildings or in trees, or wherever they could find to sleep at night to stay safe. This is not to say that chickens weren't a valuable member of a small farm or a peasant society. They absolutely were, but people really just kept them as an animal that could fend for itself and provided benefits without a whole lot of work. That's not to say that people didn't value the chickens in their farms and small holdings. I'm sure that they did. But remember that chickens were a small, scrappy sort of animal in most places throughout most of the times we're talking about here. And their job really was to fend for themselves and to eat up farmyard wastes. So people could feed them whey from cheese making, and they could pick up grain scraps that other animals had left, and generally just cruise around and could be grabbed to make a meal for dinner or eggs for whatever the family needed them for. Beginning in the mid-1800s, people in Britain, the Americas, and parts of Europe got into a bit of a chicken craze. This seems to have been inspired by the importation of different chickens from different parts of the world, which seems to have been mostly from India and China. And that encouraged people from Britain and America and Europe to start crossing these new chickens with the chickens they already had and seeing what sort of birds they could create. And during this time period, the foundations for the modern breeds that we know as our heritage breeds today, like Barred Rocks and Rhode Island Reds and Leghorns, those breeds started to be developed. People also started to learn more about keeping chickens and what the dietary requirements were for chickens, because chickens started to become a more important animal in and of themselves. By the 1920s, the breeds that we know today as our heritage breeds were pretty well established. They had their breed registries, people were breeding them, and they were a thing. The new era of chickens being separate breeds and having sort of their status as an actual animal that was important and valuable, both to chicken fanciers that might want to take chickens to a show, and as a more valuable farmyard addition, had begun. The chicken was becoming what we know it today. Now, while chickens had become much more important as a valuable animal on the farm, they still were kept predominantly for laying eggs. People had put a lot of effort into improving chickens for their egg-laying abilities, and chickens were regularly laying around 150 eggs per year during this time period, which is significantly less than chickens lay today, where a commercially bred chicken in an egg-laying farm can lay upwards of 300 eggs a year. Chickens during this time were still kept as part of a mixed farm system with other livestock. Generally speaking, most people during this period of time did not have a chicken farm where they just had chickens. Chickens were still a bonus animal, a more valuable bonus animal, providing a cash revenue stream to families from selling extra eggs and providing food when extra cockerels were slaughtered for the table. But they, generally speaking, were not an economic powerhouse of food production. This all started to change in 1946. So the war is over, people are getting back to doing their everyday life things, and the USDA, in association with a supermarket chain, decided to run a competition that they called the Chicken of Tomorrow. The idea of this competition was to develop the chicken into something that was much better as a table bird. So a meatier bird with a bigger breast, a bigger bird that could feed an entire family from one bird, because up to this point, chickens had been developed mostly as an egg-laying bird, and they were fairly thin, and they didn't have big legs or big breasts like the sort of chicken that we buy in the supermarket today. They wouldn't have even recognized that as being a chicken. It is so different from how chickens were back then. The Chicken of Tomorrow contest began in 1946 and it ended in 1948, and this competition encouraged people, breeders, anyone was able to participate to develop chickens in this direction of being good meat chickens. So lots of people competed. The vast majority of people worked on improving the pure breed chickens that they already had. So if they had Rhode Island red chickens, they tried to develop them to be meatier and meatier, but they stayed being Rhode Island red chickens, as an example. One set of competitors, Charles and Kenneth Vantris, actually won the competition. Now they had a bit of a unique idea. They used a hybrid of breeds. They used a red Cornish and a New Hampshire red, so two different breeds, hybridized together to produce a chicken that won the competition hands down to be a fantastic table bird that grew quickly and was really meaty, which were the main points of the competition. Now back then in 1948, the competition wanted a chicken to be at a butchering weight by 16 weeks old, which is quite impressive. But when you consider that today, our meat chickens that are raised for the poultry meat business, they reach a butchering weight at 6 weeks old. So between 1948, when this competition was invented and won, those genetics developed, those whole concepts of hybridizing those two breeds together, set the stage for a genetic development that has gone from a bird that was ready to eat at 16 weeks to a bird that is ready to eat in 6 weeks, which is pretty astonishing. This concept of creating a stable hybrid of multiple different breeds of chickens really pushed ahead the development of chickens into the sort of chickens that we use commercially today. So they were developed into the meat chicken we know, which is a white chicken that's very consistent. Every chicken is almost exactly the same as another chicken, and they're ready to go, like I said, at 6 to 8 weeks, depending on how big you want the chicken to be at the supermarket. We applied those same concepts for laying chickens. And now our laying chickens have gone from being a bird that can lay around 150 eggs a year to a bird that can lay over 300 eggs a year. And we've done that in a very short time frame. So we've developed our breeds into two different directions. So rather than back in the day having what we now call a dual purpose breed, like a Barred Rock or a Rhode Island Red, we have chickens that are either layers or meat chickens. And we have commercialized and industrialized those birds, making chicken, instead of a food that people didn't eat that often because it wasn't really worth it and there weren't that many chickens, to a food, to a meat that is the cheapest and most abundantly available meat that the vast majority of people on the planet can access, which is quite astonishing, but does have some drawbacks. I'm not going to talk about all of the terrible effects that an industrial chicken keeping system has here in this video today, but I just want to illustrate a small point. Now, in my flock, I keep a mixture of heritage breeds. They're not the best at laying, but I enjoy them and they're really cool. My chicks that I breed at 6 weeks old are very small still, and sometimes they are still under the care of their mother and they've only just finished getting all their feathers. They are nowhere near an adult size chicken. Whereas our modern meat chicken at 6 weeks old would be the same size as most of my hens. And that has some issues in terms of the fact that those chickens really can't live much longer than about 10 to 12 weeks old without serious health issues. We're going to move on from that industrial system and talk about how we can use the information we've just discovered about how chickens came to be to assist us in keeping our chickens well today. Today it feels like to me that we are in a new chicken craze, just like happened in the 1840s. Lots of people are really getting into chicken keeping, and that's fantastic. I love it. Everyone should have chickens, chickens for everyone. But there is a big difference because of the history that has happened in between and how we approach keeping our chickens in our new chicken craze of the 2020s. And that difference is we have invented industrialization, and that has become our standard, how we think about everything. So what I see happening today is people using the industrial model of chicken keeping, indoor chicken keeping, small spaces, a very sort of mechanized chemical perspective of keeping chickens, and just making it smaller for a backyard setting, rather than taking it from a farmyard setting where chickens have been for the vast majority of their development and working out how to make just a mini farmyard type setup for chickens. And that causes some problems where people perceive that chickens need a lot less space than they actually need to be happy and healthy and not have behavioral issues. And that's not to say that you can't keep chickens in a small space. You absolutely can, but you have to work a lot harder to keep them happy in that space. So you have to keep thinking to yourself, where did this animal come from? What is its development? What is its evolution? What is its origin? And how can I meet those needs? Taking a chicken and putting it in a square pen with just dirt or bedding on the ground and giving it essentially no enrichment and no cover and just food and water and being like, okay, there you go, you have so much more space than you would have in an industrial system, of course you're going to be happy, isn't the right way to approach it. The better way to have happy, healthy and problem-free chickens is to make your environment as close to a jungly farmyard environment as you can, with as much space as you can give your flock, where they can hide under things, get up on different levels, and really have the ability to get out of the way of each other. If they have enough space and they can get out of line of sight of their flock buddies, they're not going to have anywhere near as many behavioral issues as I do see some people having with their chicken flocks today. I used my understanding of where chickens came from to choose the location of where I put the main chicken run where my chickens spend most of their time. And that is, I chose an area that was covered in trees and shrubs. At least 50% of that area where my chickens like to hang out has cover for them, so they can duck under the bushes, they can feel safe, they can get out of the way of each other, and they are very happy and calm and chill. Now, they have the option of coming into a much, much larger area, but even though they have that option available to them all the time, they still prefer to hang out the vast majority of their day in that small section of bushy area. And that just goes to show you that they really do like to stick with their evolution, who they are as a species. They like the security of that cover, and it keeps them happy and it stops them from beating each other up. All of this video is to say that chickens have had a very interesting and long history side by side with humans all over the world. We have done some pretty crazy things with developing them into the breeds we have today, and there is a movement to pushing back that crazy industrial breeding system to a more balanced bird. And I'm really interested to see what happens in that space. So it'll be great to see how humans and chickens go forward together into the future.